The wind screamed through the pines like a dying choir, tearing at the man's coat as he rode through the storm. Snow fell in sheets, blinding and merciless. The world reduced to white chaos and wolf howls. He heard them first. Low, drawn-out cries circling something unseen ahead. Then, through the blur, a flicker of crimson. A hooded figure stumbling across the drifts, chased by shadows on four legs. He kicked his horse forward, rifle drawn, heart pounding like a drum of war. What kind of woman wandered these hills alone? And why did every instinct in him whisper he'd seen that red cloak before, in a nightmare or a legend long buried under ice and silence? The first wolf lunged. The shot cracked. Snow burst red. When the last echo died, she was on her knees, trembling. He reached her, brushed frost from her hood, and when she looked up, every story he'd ever doubted came alive in her eyes. He built a fire in the half-collapsed cabin, hands shaking as he laid her beside the hearth. The storm raged outside, devouring the light that tried to escape the cracked walls. She hadn't spoken since the wolves. Only her eyes moved, tracking him like she already knew him. He poured whiskey over a cut on her arm, watched her flinch without sound. The way she stared into the fire, it was like she was seeing through it, through time itself. When he asked her name, she whispered something that made his blood freeze. A name he'd only heard once, in a story his mother told him as a boy, about a woman who'd cheated death and wore red to hide her sins. Morning came pale and hollow. The fire had died to embers, and frost crept along the windows like fingers searching for life. Outside, the wolves had vanished, leaving only tracks circling the cabin. She sat upright now, her voice steady as she asked him where the river led. When he told her, north toward Vales Hollow, she smiled faintly, as though that was what she'd been waiting for. He didn't like that smile. It carried too much knowing, too much history. He strapped his rifle, wondering if he'd saved her or unleashed something that should have stayed buried in the snow. They rode through the valley in silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and ghostly. Pines stood like sentinels, their branches heavy with snow. The woman's hood was drawn again, but he could feel her gaze on him, steady, unreadable. He asked nothing. Questions had a way of dying out here, swallowed by the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang once. He looked back, but there was no town, no church, no sign of life at all. By nightfall, they reached the old bridge. The river beneath it was half frozen, whispering like breath between teeth. She dismounted, knelt at the water's edge, and placed her hand upon the ice. He saw shapes swirling beneath, faces maybe, or tricks of the moonlight. She whispered a name again, the same one that had chilled him before. Then she turned, and for a heartbeat, her eyes weren't amber anymore. They were the color of the storm. The storm had moved east, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than thunder. The cabin walls creaked under the weight of cold, the fire reduced to dying glow. He woke to find her gone, the door ajar, and footprints vanishing into the trees. He followed, every sound sharpened by fear. When he found her, she was standing barefoot in the snow, eyes closed, whispering to the wind. It wasn't prayer. It was something older. The way the pines bent toward her made his skin crawl. When she opened her eyes, she smiled faintly and said, "They remember you." He didn't know what she meant, but he wished he hadn't asked. They rode west by noon, following the frozen creek that wound toward the mountains. He kept his distance, but her silence filled the air like a hum. Once he caught her humming an old tune, something his mother used to sing when the storms came. He asked where she learned it, and she just looked at him, sadness flickering across her face like a passing shadow. The land grew stranger the farther they rode. Trees blackened by fire, crosses half buried in snow. Whatever she was looking for, he could feel it pulling both of them closer, like a noose tightening around the world. That night, they found shelter beneath a cliff overhang. The stars burned sharp above the canyon, the fire a trembling dot in the dark. She sat apart, staring at something unseen beyond the flames. He asked her again where she was headed. This time she answered, "Home." He frowned, said there was nothing north but ruins. She nodded, said, "That's where I was buried." The fire cracked, and for a heartbeat he thought the wind whispered her name. He didn't sleep after that. The next morning he noticed tracks that weren't theirs circling the camp. Not wolves this time. Men. Boots. He followed them to the ridge and saw smoke rising from the west. A small group was watching them, riders half hidden among the trees. He told her to stay close, but she shook her head. "They're not here for me," she said quietly. "They're here for you." He turned toward her, but she was already walking toward the river, her reflection trailing like fire across the ice. They reached the ridge by dusk, the valley yawning below like a grave. Smoke from distant fires blurred the horizon. She stopped, turned toward him, and spoke softly. "You think you saved me, Elias? But you only brought me back." He wanted to ask what that meant, but her eyes told him not to. Behind them, a wolf howled once. Long, low, almost human. The air shifted colder, and the sound carried through his bones like memory. Whatever she was, whatever followed her, it wasn't done yet. The valley opened before them like the mouth of a buried world. Snow-covered ruins dotted the basin, collapsed roofs, stone chimneys, and the splintered bones of an old town half swallowed by time. He knew the name carved into the sign buried under frost before brushing it clean. Vales Hollow. The wind moaned through empty windows, carrying voices that weren't the wind's alone. She dismounted slowly, her boots sinking into the snow. "This is where it began," she whispered. He didn't ask what she meant, because he already knew. The name on that sign had been in stories, older than any map, and now it waited for them, half alive in the ice. Inside what remained of the old saloon, dust and frost lay thick across the warped floorboards. He found a cracked mirror behind the bar, its surface clouded by time. When he wiped it clean, his reflection blinked. Once, after he stopped moving, she stood behind him, watching silently, her face unreadable. "Do you see them?" she asked. He turned to speak, but there was no one behind her. Only the pale light swaying through the open doorway, like ghosts drifting between centuries. They found the church at the far end of town, its steeple-cracked bell long fallen into the nave. Candles still burned faintly inside, melted into puddles on the altar. Someone had been here recently. She touched one of the candles, tracing its edge. "He's close," she murmured. Elias frowned. "Who?" Her eyes lifted toward the balcony, where a shadow moved. Not fast, not slow, but with purpose. A man's voice drifted down, old and steady. "You finally came back." Elias raised his rifle. The shadow stepped into the light. The preacher's eyes gleamed with both madness and sorrow. "I warned them she would return," he said softly, "but they buried the truth beneath snow and blood." Mara stepped closer, unafraid. "You kept my name alive," she said. Her voice trembled, not with fear but memory. Elias felt the air tighten, the world bending around their words. The old man nodded, tears freezing on his lashes. "Every 100 winters," he whispered, "the hollow breathes again." Outside, the wind howled like laughter or warning. When the old preacher handed him the journal, Elias hesitated. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed and torn. "This is her story," Silas said, "and yours, if you choose to read it." He flipped through drawings. A woman in red, wolves circling beneath a blood moon, a man's silhouette beside her. The handwriting changed halfway through, shifting from a priest's neat lines to something wild and desperate. On the final page was a single sentence written in dried blood. "The one who saves her must take her place." Elias closed the book and looked up. Mara was gone. By the time they reached Silver Hollow, night had sunk its claws into the land. The town was little more than a scatter of dim lamps, flickering through the fog like dying stars. She rode ahead without speaking, her crimson cloak dragging across the snow like spilled blood. He followed, uneasy. The silence felt watched. At the end of the street, a lantern flared to life, and a man stepped out, broad-shouldered, gray-eyed, a badge glinting on his chest. Elias knew him. Sheriff Colt Avery. They had ridden together once, long ago. The lawman's gaze moved from Elias to the woman beside him, and his hand fell slowly to his holster. "You shouldn't have brought her here," he said, and his voice carried more fear than threat. Inside the sheriff's office, the walls creaked with the cold. Colt poured whiskey into 2 tin cups, but left one untouched. His hands shook when he spoke. "You know what she is, don't you?" Elias didn't answer. The sheriff's eyes darted toward the frosted window where her shadow moved outside. "I saw her once," he said. "When I was a boy. Same cloak. Same eyes. My father said if she ever came back, the hollow would open again." He leaned forward, voice breaking. "You brought the curse with you, Eli. You brought it right to my door." Elias looked down at the untouched drink, his reflection rippling in the amber surface like a man already gone. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint cry of wolves. Elias stepped outside, rifle slung low, scanning the dark. The streets were empty now, but he felt movement behind every corner. Mara stood at the well in the center of town, her head bowed, her cloak rippling like a living thing. He called her name, but she didn't move. Then he saw them. Tracks forming in the snow behind her, though no one was there to make them. They circled her like ghosts, dancing in the cold. When she finally looked up, her eyes were no longer amber but silver, catching the moonlight like mirrors. The howl rose again, closer this time. Sheriff Avery stumbled out of his office, shotgun ready, shouting for the men who weren't there. The town had gone silent except for the wind. He fired once into the dark, and the echo rolled through the hills like thunder. Elias turned toward him just as the sheriff's face drained of color. From the fog, shadows emerged, shapes moving on all fours, their eyes burning faint gold. The wolves had returned, but they didn't look hungry this time. They looked sentient, waiting. Mara stepped forward between them, the pack parting like an army before its queen. "It's time," she whispered. Elias didn't know if she was warning him or inviting him to join her. The wolves didn't attack. They only watched. Avery lowered his gun, trembling. "Dear God," he whispered. But God had stopped listening to this town long ago. Mara looked at Elias, her expression calm, sad. "Every hollow has a keeper," she said softly. "And every keeper is bound by blood." She turned toward the sheriff, her shadow stretching across the snow until it reached his boots. "Your family buried me here once," she said. "Now the ground remembers." The wind fell still, the world holding its breath. Then the snow beneath Avery's feet cracked like a gunshot. The sheriff screamed as the ground swallowed him whole. Elias stood frozen, the only sound the soft flutter of her cloak as she turned away. The next morning broke without sunlight. A gray stillness hung over the valley, and the air carried a faint hum, like the earth itself was whispering. Elias stood alone by the ruins of the sheriff's office, staring at the spot where Avery had vanished. Snow had sealed it over again, smooth and perfect, as if the ground had never opened. Mara waited near the church, her face calm, unreadable. "You saw what needed to be seen," she said. "The hollow remembers its debt." He wanted to ask what debt, but the wind rose suddenly, and a sound like breathing echoed from beneath their feet. When he met her gaze, he saw it, the reflection of faces moving inside her eyes. Inside the church, the air was colder than the snow outside. The journal lay open on the altar where he'd left it, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. Mara stood at the doorway, voice low. "Every century, the hollow chooses a heart to bear its sorrow," she said. A man who carries guilt enough to feed it. He stared at her, realization cutting through him like frost. You think that's me? She stepped closer, her breath warm against his cheek. You came looking for redemption, didn't you? He said nothing. The candles flickered, and the floorboards began to tremble. Softly at first, then harder, as if something vast moved beneath them. He followed her into the woods behind the church, where the snow grew thin and the ground steamed faintly from the frozen soil. It's waking, she said. Beneath the trees, he saw shapes in the mist, outlines of men and women standing still, heads bowed, as if waiting for something. He took a step closer and realized they weren't breathing. Frost clung to their lashes, their skin pale as marble. Graves opened around them like wounds. Mara's voice trembled. They were the first to curse me. Now they wait for forgiveness. He turned to her, and if they don't get it, she looked away. Then you'll join them. The wind turned violent, swirling through the forest as the ground began to split. From the cracks came whispers, pleading, crying, chanting. Elias covered his ears, but the sound was inside his head, calling his name. Mara reached for his hand, her touch like fire against his frozen skin. It has chosen, she said. You can end it, or you can feed it. He pulled away, voice breaking. What are you? Her eyes softened, a memory that wouldn't die. Then the forest went silent, and for a moment he thought the world had stopped. Until the first body opened its eyes, night fell fast. The hollow came alive with lightless movement, wolves howling from nowhere, bells ringing from churches long gone. Mara stood at the edge of the valley, cloak whipping like a banner. It's not me they want, she said quietly. It's the one who still believes he can save me. Elias stepped forward, anger cracking through his fear. Then tell me how to stop it. She turned slowly, eyes glowing with mournful fire. You can't stop what you already began. Behind them, the earth opened once more, and the wind carried the sound of a heartbeat the size of the valley itself. Snow fell harder than it had all winter, turning the world into a storm of white fire. The sound of wolves echoed between the cliffs, 1,000 howls woven into one unending cry. Elias moved through it like a man walking through a dream, the wind stealing his breath. He found Mara at the base of the hill, kneeling before an open grave. The journal lay beside her, its pages soaked and frozen stiff. She looked up at him, tears carving clean lines down her frost-covered cheeks. Every man thinks he can bury his sins, she said, but sins remember the way home. He reached out, but the ground between them cracked open, and something began to crawl out. Hands, faces, shapes. The dead rose one by one, silent and swaying like trees in a windless field. Elias fired until the rifle clicked empty, but the bullets only stirred snow and memories. Mara didn't move. Her eyes were distant, lost to some unseen horizon. They're not coming for me, she said. They're coming for you. He dropped to his knees, chest heaving, vision blurred by tears and steam. Why me? He shouted. Her answer came soft, broken. Because you were the last to believe. I could be saved. The words echoed through the hollow, and every corpse turned its face toward him. He stumbled backward through the graves, heart pounding like thunder. Every step echoed with the crunch of old bones. Mara followed, her voice drifting through the wind. You can end it, she said, but you must take my place. He turned on her, fury trembling through his breath. You want me to die for you? She shook her head slowly. No, I want you to remember me. The world trembled. The storm grew black at its center, spinning above the church like the eye of something alive. He looked up, snow burning against his face, and realized it wasn't the sky that was moving. It was the hollow itself. breathing. The bell that hadn't tolled in 100 years began to ring. Each sound rolled through the valley like thunder, shaking the mountain to its roots. The risen dead fell to their knees. Mara's cloak tore free, carried into the storm, and for the first time Elias saw her as she truly was. Not ghost, not ghost, not woman, but something caught between the two. "Take it," she said, holding out the journal. "Burn my story, and the hollow sleeps again." He struck a match with trembling hands, but when the flame touched the pages, the words screamed. Hundreds of voices trapped inside. Fire lit the snow red, and Mara cried out as the wind swallowed her voice. The fire roared higher, feeding on the wind. The wolves began to howl again, not in anger but mourning. The dead sank slowly back into their graves, the earth closing over them with a sigh. Elias stood in the ashes of the church, watching the flames devour every trace of the past. Mara lay near the doorway, motionless, her cloak now only embers. He knelt beside her, brushing snow from her cheek. Her eyes opened once, faint and far away. "It's done," she whispered. But not for long. Then her breath faded into the wind, and the storm began to die. Only the heartbeat of falling snow remained. When the storm passed, silence fell like grace. The valley lay buried in white once more, smoke drifting from the ruins of the church like the last breath of a dying world. Elias stood alone, hat in hand, snow crusting his shoulders. The wolves had gone. Even the wind seemed afraid to speak. He looked down at the spot where Mara had lain. Nothing remained but her cloak, untouched by ash, its red brighter than blood against the snow. He reached for it, but his hands stopped short, trembling. For the first time in years, he prayed, not for forgiveness, but for remembrance. Behind him the mountains sighed like tired giants, and a single bell rang somewhere deep beneath the ice. He carried the cloak with him as he left the hollow, riding through a world washed clean. The trail wound between ridges heavy with snow, his breath rising in plumes that caught the dawn light. The sky bled pink, then gold, and for a moment he thought he saw her riding beside him. Not ghostly, not gone, just there. He didn't speak, afraid the vision would break. Her smile lingered long after she faded, and with it came a strange peace he hadn't known in a lifetime, the kind that hurts, but heals all the same. Somewhere behind him, the valley slept again, its curse traded for a memory. He reached the edge of the Bitter Ridge Plains by dusk, where the snow thinned and the air smelled faintly of sage and smoke. A small chapel stood there, long abandoned. He dismounted, stepped inside, and laid the cloak across the altar. For a moment, the air warmed. Candles that had been dead for years flickered to life, one by one. He smiled faintly, whispering her name, not in grief, but in gratitude. The flame answered, burning steady. Then, as if satisfied, it went out. Outside, the sun dropped below the horizon, leaving only the hush of snow and the whisper of hooves, retreating into twilight. Night fell gentle and clear. He made camp near the river, its ice now thin and whispering with the first signs of spring. The stars came out, bright, endless, unblinking. He thought of her voice, of the way she said his name like it belonged to another time. The fire crackled low, and for a fleeting instant, he heard her laughter in the wind. Soft, real, alive. He looked up, and the northern sky shimmered crimson, a curtain of light flowing like her cloak. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Maybe it was just the sky. Maybe it wasn't. By morning, his tracks were the only proof he'd ever been there. The valley behind him slept beneath a perfect veil of snow, but deep beneath that frozen earth where stories and bones shared the same silence, a single ember glowed. It pulsed once faintly, like a heartbeat. The curse wasn't gone, just dreaming. And somewhere far ahead, a rider in a weathered hat and torn duster carried a legend folded in red, riding toward a horizon no man ever reaches. maybe redemption isn't escape. Maybe it's remembering and choosing to keep riding anyway.